On September 11, 2001, the world watched in horror as two planes struck the Twin Towers in New York City, killing thousands and leaving behind a trail of devastation that would scar the nation forever. Among the countless families searching for their loved ones in the chaos of the day, one stood out, not just because of the tragedy of loss, but because of the mystery that still lingers more than 2 decades later. A 31-year-old doctor named Sneha Anne Philip vanished in the hours leading up to the attacks. And while her name is now officially included among the victims of the Trade Center, questions have never stopped swirling about what truly happened to her. Did she die a hero, rushing into the towers to help as so many others did? Or did something far darker happen to her? We're going to trace Sneha's story from the vibrant young woman she was to the last haunting images of her on surveillance tape. And finally, to the chilling uncertainty that has left her disappearance one of the most baffling mysteries tied to 9/11. Sneha Anne Philip was born in India and raised in a family that valued education, ambition, and opportunity. She grew into a striking young woman, intelligent, fiercely independent, and according to those who loved her, never afraid to speak her mind. Sneha pursued a career in medicine, and by the early 2000s, she was living in New York City with her husband, Ron Lieberman, a fellow doctor she had met in medical school. The couple lived in Battery Park, in an apartment with a perfect view of the Twin Towers. Their home was close enough that on the morning of September 11th, Ron would later describe the dust and debris seeping in through their windows as the towers fell. At 31 years old, Sneha's life was both full of promise and shadowed by turbulence. She had recently faced disciplinary issues at her hospital residency, accused of unprofessional behavior, claims she strongly denied. Friends say she was outspoken and unafraid to challenge authority, qualities that sometimes made her a target in a rigid medical environment. Outside of work, Sneha was vibrant, social, and artistic. She loved painting, she loved the freedom of the New York nightlife, and she was known to stay out late at bars and clubs, sometimes with her husband, other times with friends. For her family, this was simply a part of her bold spirit. For investigators, later on, these choices would be twisted into a narrative of recklessness and instability. On September 10, 2001, Sneha had a relatively normal day, at least as the records show. That afternoon, she visited Century 21, the massive department store across from the World Trade Center. Surveillance footage captured her shopping, calmly browsing through items and eventually purchasing lingerie, bed linens, and several outfits. She carried the bags out of the store, and this is the very last confirmed sighting of her. That evening, her husband Ron later testified that he saw her in the morning before leaving for work, but that she didn't return home later that night. According to Ron, this wasn't unusual. Sneha sometimes spent nights with her friends in the city, and their relationship, while loving, allowed for a degree of independence. But this absence would become crucial in the timeline of her disappearance. When the Twin Towers fell the next morning, Sneha's whereabouts were unknown, and the uncertainty would fuel speculation for decades to come. Ron had spent the night of September 10th working an overnight shift at the hospital. Exhausted, he returned home on the morning of the 11th, only to walk into a nightmare. His apartment was engulfed in a crazy haze of dust and smoke, the streets filled with sirens, screams, and chaos. Sneha was nowhere to be found. The family believed without hesitation that she had run towards the towers to help. It was in her nature to care for others, and in the desperate moments of that morning, countless civilians and professionals alike rushed to the disaster site to offer aid. For Sneha's family, it seemed almost certain that she had been one of them, lost in the dust and fire when the buildings collapsed. But the police weren't so sure. As the initial days of confusion gave way to investigations, detectives began looking more closely at Sneha's final 24 hours. What they found would cast a long shadow over her case. Investigators noticed that Sneha had not returned home the night of September 10th. They pointed to her history of staying out late, sometimes drinking heavily, and suggested that she may have been out with strangers, involved in affairs, or spiraling into reckless behavior. They referenced her disciplinary issues at the hospital, framing them as evidence that her personal life was unraveling. For Sneha's family, these suggestions felt cruel, especially in the aftermath of a national tragedy. They argued that the surveillance footage showing her shopping proved she had plans for her life and her home. Why would a woman about to run away from everything buy bed linens and lingerie? Why would she invest in small comforts for her apartment if she intended to disappear? Ron remained confident in his belief that Sneha died trying to help others. He said that her absence that night was not unusual, but her failure to come home after the towers fell was unthinkable. As months passed, the lack of answers only deepened the rift between the official narrative of the police and the heartfelt conviction of her family. Over the years, three main theories have emerged about Sarah's fate. The first is the family's belief that she was a hero of 9/11. They argue that Sneha, upon hearing the chaos, rushed towards the burning towers, driven by her instinct as a doctor. Her remains may have never been identified due to the sheer scale of destruction, but her absence can only be explained by her presence at Ground Zero. The second theory, favored by police, is that she disappeared for personal reasons. They painted a picture of a woman with a crumbling career, a complicated marriage, and a hidden nightlife. They suggested that she may have chosen to walk away, perhaps even starting a new life under another identity. But this theory ignores the suddenness of her disappearance, the timing with the worst attack in American history, and the shopping that she had just done. The third theory is foul play. Some speculate that after leaving Century 21, Sneha may have encountered someone who harmed her. Whether an acquaintance or a stranger, if she was attacked or abducted that night, her disappearance would have been nearly impossible to trace, especially as the city plunged into a chaos the next morning. The disaster of 9/11 provided a cover so overwhelming that almost any crime could have been lost within it. For years, Sneha's family fought tirelessly to have her recognized as a victim of 9/11. They faced resistance from officials who argued there was no definitive evidence that she had been at Ground Zero. But in 2008, after a lengthy legal battle, Sneha was officially declared the 2,751st victim of the World Trade Center attack. Her name is now inscribed among the others at the memorial. For Ron and the rest of her family, this was not just a symbolic victory, but a recognition of the woman they knew. A doctor, a wife, a daughter, and a compassionate soul who would not have stood by while others suffered. And yet, even with that recognition, the questions remain. Was Sneha truly there, running towards danger when everyone else was running away? Did her personal struggles lead her into a different fate, one obscured forever by the smoke and fire of that day? Or was she silenced by some unseen violence, her case swallowed whole by the tragedy of 9/11? We may never know the full truth. Sneha is remembered not only as a possible victim of terrorism, but as a person whose final hours remain suspended in a mystery, forever tied to one of the darkest days in history. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay aware and stay safe.